So like a lot of you, I bought a guitar and I learned 3 chords and thought I'd play guitar. And that's not as easy as it looks. So I applied for university and came to BU and found an incredible music scene. And went to school there. And it was a great school, great town, great music scene. And at BU, in my junior and senior years, my favorite professor was the head of creative design at his own agency here in Boston, and it was like the hottest agency in the 80s. He was also a guitar player, so at all of the parties, they'd have his band play, which was super cool. And it lent me, I interned at his studio for my junior and senior year, and then he hired me out of school. He became my mentor. He still is, lives in Austin, and I see him once a year. But a few years later, I landed an assistant art director position at a record label up in Salem. It was actually CD only, his first CD only label. And they got a lot of catalogs. They got Yoko Ono's catalog. They did Frank Zappa, David Bowie, Elvis Costello, all these people. And that's where my music began and still continues today as far as my process goes. It's a little harder today, of course. Record companies aren't what they used to be, and it's easier to put it out yourself. And I've told independent artists, I say, why would you go to a record company? Social media you can do yourself. I'll do your artwork for you. And what I wanted to do today, we had a very nice conversation, and are most of y'all musicians on that side of the music? I think there's a linked passion between music art and playing music. And do you have something?
Just wondering, what do you, how do you, get a sort of creative connection to the art of the album cover and the actual album? How do you formulate the idea?
So we're going to talk about that because funnily enough, I've done a bunch of albums for Branford Marsalis, and it grew into a trust where he would tell me, he goes, I'll send you the music and you design what you hear, which is incredible. And I was like, don't F this up. Okay, and I didn't because I've worked with him a lot, but let's just jump into some of the ones that I highlighted, because what I'd like to do, and then I can show you others and take questions, but what I'd like to do is point out some of the creative, the same creative choices that you have to make as a designer and a musician. Sometimes something doesn't work, and what do you do to fix it, right? So I'm going to start with what I did in college, and I was with this art director, and he told me, and I'm going to apologize in advance to drummers in here, but he said pick something that you like and do a 3-ad campaign, right? Now I want to point out this is way, way, way before computers, so everything was drawn by hand on these big canvases. Type was sketched in. So I picked the Lindrum, which was one of the very first. Okay, he's happy. So what I tried to do was have some fun with this, and this was the first one I did. I drew that, there's the type, but we fooled Bessie because she can play a cowbell on her Lindrum, and the cow behind her is quite surprised, right? So I was 18 years old, I guess, when I did these, and I moved it to something. This is Nile Rodgers from Chic, who's a heck of a producer, and I made up that quote for him. If I wanted a time, I'd hire a drummer. It didn't go over well with drummers, but they got the humor that I was trying to get to. And then the last one was along those lines, kind of similar, but it's a drummer that actually stops playing when you tell him to. A lot of people really like this one. So these are just sketches. These are, that's supposed to be the type, the waves, and I drew all this stuff. And when I joined the agency, they didn't even really, there were no computers, so it took a while to learn all of that stuff. So the music that was just on is a Branford Marsalis record that I did. And this is the one that I did first, and then afterwards he told me, design what you hear, right? So we were listening to that music, like we just heard, and I came up with this idea because it was mirth and melancholy are two very different ideas, right? Mirth being fun, melancholy being blues, right? Like you're blue. And so I found some clip art on the computers and the web, and I put together 2 guys up against a wall standing very far apart from each other. And I sold that to him, and I said, we can shoot this live, and you can walk away from each other, you can do this. Right before the shoot was gonna happen, a week or so before, the place we were going to do the shoot canceled. His manager knew the person at the Museum of Fine Arts, and we could do the shoot in front of this huge new beautiful wall that they had just installed. The tricky part, musicians will love this, we had a 6 a.m. shoot call because it was a holiday weekend and they opened at 8. So we had to do the shoot at 6 a.m. So this is the album that we came up with. And you can see, the different expressions of emotion. The reason that happened is because these guys were standing around like this for hours and just walking away, and walking, the photographer is shooting. For this particular shot, Joey, who's the one on the right, cracked a joke and then looked away. Bramford started laughing, so he hit his face. It was one shot. There was just one negative of that, which to me showed both emotions, pretty loud and clear. And to get there, we went to other things. The nice thing about this is I have this poster signed in my house, but you can see it's much more effective in this scale, I think. It's just more interesting to have this giant wall, which I think speaks to both of those emotions and then the difference between those emotions. There's always a back cover. This is what we use, just a different expression, slightly different area. The funny thing is, like I said, having musicians up at 6 o'clock in the morning, having to get makeup on and suits on and everything, you might be playing with fire, because here's where, Bramford started, just making an ass of himself, and I mean that in the kindest way possible. I think that was a dog kicking, something like that, so this was never gonna be the cover. But you're sitting around waiting for your picture to be shot for 2 hours, and that's what happens. So another one I did for Bramford, and I'm gonna have to be a little bit kind in terms of the name of the record, is Bramford had just started. That's Joey on the far left out of tune, the piano player we just saw. The other is his new rhythm section, and he told me, he goes, this is the hottest rhythm section I've played with. They just give me so much energy, and I want the cover to reflect that. So, I came up with the idea of just having it on a white seamless background, and I told the photographer, I said, I want you to shoot it so that the people walking in the background are all blurred, but Bramford is sitting on the chair, and that shows the energy that's behind him in the music, right? So we shot this, and it came out really, really good. While I was there, I decided, because it happened very quickly, and I decided, okay, so we have to do a paneled booklet. So let's see every one of the artists, see? So this is the cover here. But then I said, let's feature all of the guys on the chair. And of course, the drummer and the bass player were overwhelmed with joy because they've never been on an album cover before. And then I folded it a certain way and then put the type on it. So you could fold this thing and you could put the drummer, if you're the drummer, you've got you on the cover. You could fold it in a way that you could put any one of these 4 guys.
I noticed in the one where I put this in the front, there's like a thin sliver of white next to his face, which like sort of delineate, and it's like delineating him for like the person using the back.
Oh, I don't even, well, see, I can't quite see it there, but I will. Yeah, well, these guys were walking like really, really fast and just walking. The photographer just shooting. And then afterwards, we didn't know what we had until we looked at it, right? And luckily it was digital cameras. It wasn't film cameras, thank God. So everybody loved this idea. And while I was waiting to figure other stuff out, it's like, I'm trying to think and I'm going through like, okay, so what are we gonna do with the back cover, right? We've done all these great front covers. And so I went through where he was just trying to light up the chair that Bramford sat. And I said, so what's the primary item in all 4 of these guys' shoots? It was the chair. So I found this empty chair and I was like, that's the back cover. But this is also, and as great as it is on the left, the reason I'm showing this is because by necessity, this is all the crap you have to put on the back, right? You've got the track listing, you've got the production credits, you've got the copyright, you've got the logo, you've got the UPC. So you've got to make sure you've got space for that stuff. Sometimes, trust me, I've seen artists with the UPC cutting out their throat or their forehead. And it's not a great thing to do. So the funny thing about this one is after I mocked these up, because we saw them live on the computer while they got shot, and everybody was super, super happy. And we had a conference call. It was me, Branford, his manager, and his label, basically, on the front line, and everybody's like, wow, this is great, this is great. And then the manager says, well, Branford, you still don't have a name for this record. Can I use a bad word here? Sure. So Branford goes, I don't care if you call it Four Mother playing tunes. Hangs up the phone. We're like, oh man, what the heck do we do here? So it was kind of like, well, let's talk about this tomorrow, you know. And so we hung up, scheduled the time to talk tomorrow. And I was thinking about it, and I said, you know, that's a really good name for the record. So I called them back the next day, and I said, what do you think, can we abbreviate that? And the owner of the Marsalis Music is like, oh, I don't know about that. And she was definitely unaware. And everybody said, well, I think we can get away with that, you know? So it is 4MFs playing tunes. So that one worked. You know, there's situations here which didn't quite work so well. That one did. And this was a record that I did at Rounder, and they were looking for a designer, and I said, I'll design it. It has Alison Krauss on it. Y'all know Alison Krauss at all? Big blue, she's won a ton of Grammys. Yeah, yeah. And so she did a record with Robert Plant. You guys know who he is, right? Yes? Okay. So this was actually shot by Pamela Springsteen, who has a very famous brother who just played 2 nights ago at the Garden. And I worked with her on this. I didn't go to the shoot because it was in California. But the interesting thing about this one, when you talk about having everybody agree and like 4MFs is a name, in this particular shot, this was the last shot of the day, and she shot it with 35mm Tri-X film, which at that end of the day, on the beach in the sun, you're gonna get some grain, which I think makes the cover. I think that's what makes this work the way it does. You know, 2 people, one who was above me at the label and one who was at mine, did not like it at all. They said, well, we like the picture, can you get rid of the grain? And I said, well, not really, but I'll try. So I had to hire a company to do that because it's at that point in time. It was like $7,000 by the time I spent it. It looked like crap, you know? And they were kind of liking it. And so I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna send it. I knew Robert's manager very well. I did about 5 or 6 album covers for Alison. I knew her manager. The photographer, Pamela, I knew just from this project. But I sent it to her and I said, listen, there's some movement afoot to take out the grain. And all of them were like, hell no, 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 no. So I took it back to the 2 people and, you know, kind of put a huge target on my back for the last times that I worked at that label, because they were like, well, we liked it. And it's kind of like, it's the artist's face on the cover, so they kind of get to pick. But again, something like this, I try and be consistent in terms of, you know, the packaging. I like to have, I don't know why that's there. I like to have, you know, when you look at the package that you can understand, you were talking about the music as a whole, right? Instead of just like 5 different shoots and 5 different pictures. To me, that doesn't impress me. So this was the picture that was selected. And then again, as we spoke before, you got to get all the crap in. So all of a sudden, it's a lot of stuff. So that's where you end up, you know, you end up there, but there's other places to make your point. And this was the folding digipack. And what I did was, you know, I put together that beach run from here to here, just from a photograph, and I just made collages of the sand in the ocean and put the sand up there. So, you know, it came out really nice, consistent, everyone was happy, and it won, I think, 7 or 8 Grammys, something like that. Not for design, unfortunately, so I didn't get to go. And while we're talking about Alison, and also, you know, with you guys that are musicians, and certainly the ones that are designers, is sometimes you have to bend to the will. Here I didn't. But one of the things that's very difficult to shooting a band is you got 5 people. You got 5 people's faces. There's a good chance one of them is going to say, everyone looks great in that shot but me, right? And then what do you do? So that happened in this one, which was her record before that, which is also a really great record. Yeah, and so for this one, we really wanted to shoot this at the Grand Ole Opry dressing rooms, right? Couldn't do that, so we had somebody down there make this room with all this stuff up there and put them in the room. So Allison loved it. This guy didn't like what he looked like, so he cut off his head and put on another head. This guy here, he was afraid people would think he was looking at Allison's chest, so we put new eyeballs in there that were looking in a different direction. What's that?
That's Jerry Douglas.
Yes, yes. And so, there's always that kind of stuff, especially with 5 people. I love this one because I know the work that the set designer did was just beautiful, and it stood the test of time. So, any questions so far? Or you want me to keep going?
Question in the back from Tom.
How did you get your first opportunity?
Here?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I was working in an ad agency in Cambridge, and a woman who I worked with there, who I was her boss kind of, but she found an ad in Adweek magazine, real magazine that advertised jobs in the ad business, and it was looking for an assistant art director at a CD-only company in Salem, right? And so, I sent them my resume. I didn't have any album cover work, but they called me up for an interview, and I'm a huge, huge music fan. I can talk music, classical, jazz, anything. Heavy metal, not so much. But I had a great interview with them. And I came home, told my wife, I said, I think I got that job. She goes, well, did they tell you that? I was like, no, but I think I did. So the next day I had to go back up for another interview with the president, and I got hired on the spot. And I was there for like 15 years, something like that. And then they got bought out, and I had to find my way again, which is where I landed at Rounder, which is right in Cambridge.
So that was Ryko Disc in Salem.
Yep. And they did, they're the ones who bought all the catalogs. They did the Yoko Ono's and Frank Zappa's and Elvis Costello's and Jimi Hendrix and all these great people. So we'll go, this is another thing. I think that these are 2 really interesting, one here and one here, about like your skill set and how you arrive at what you're trying to get the music to look like. There's a band called Orange Symphonette, and they're a young jazz band. I think it's 5 people, and they're really, really interesting. These are old now, but they did a cover album of Mancini tunes, right? You all know Mancini, right? He's the guy who did the Pink Panther, and he does a lot of music for movies. Right. So they did a thing, and I came up with this idea, but I wanted a sketch, and I'm not a fine artist. Design and fine art are 2 different things. But I pushed myself and did this in Illustrator, and that was kind of the look I was going for. The reason I talked about this one is, it still works. It was an early on thing for me, but sometimes you get what you want and sometimes you don't. This was a lot better the way I presented it. This is what got approved. And what did not get approved is this one, which to me is a hell of a lot better. All of a sudden there's the hook, right? There's the hook. And our legal staff said no hook. So we had to take the Pink Panther out. But that's what it is, Sometimes you come up with something you love and you got to scale it down a little bit. I did another job with them that I really liked because the conceptualness of it, the whole building. And they're a funny band. They came out, and I'm guessing it's with the success of the Beatles' White Album or Prince's Black Album. They came up with something that they wanted to call the Orange Album, because that's the name of their band. So here's what I came up with. The Orange Album, right? They loved it. It's kind of not really a joke, but it was a fun take on that. So once they approved it, I said, all right, well, as I said for the back cover and the tray cards, you got to add all this stuff. So what I did is take a slice of the orange, which represents the pieces of the song that make the whole album, and point to the album cover. It's a piece of a piece, right? So that worked out pretty well. And then I did the disc like this. which is fun. My favorite part, we did clear trays most of the time at Rykodis. My favorite part, maybe anybody can guess, like if I'm slicing up slices of the album for songs, you take the disc out, and what do you get? Yes, the seeds underneath the whole slice of it. So that was like the easy bit.
I know some artists have like a continuous theme across like all of their album covers. I was wondering, like, have you ever done that with an artist?
I'd have to think, not really. One of the most important lessons I learned was at that first CD-only label. Back then in those days, the mid-'80s, there were a bunch of labels, 4AD is one of them. And all of their album covers, didn't matter who the groups were, they all had this same kind of look. And the president at Rykodis said, we don't want that. We want the music to be reflected, not the label. And I always appreciated that because I think that's much more interesting. And also serving the music. So this one was a fun one. And let's see, these are getting a little shorter, so if anybody wants to jump in and ask on something, let's see. So we were talking about, a lot of times people will give you what they want on the album cover, right? And they'll say, this is the picture I want to use. And I've got a couple of those. This is a guy I've worked a ton with. He's a jazz drummer, and he's also become to believe in me. He just tells me to do whatever I want, which is sometimes very hard. This is the photograph that he gave me, and it's an album called Conversations, right? I like the photograph, but I like what I did better, as did he, because I thought it represented, I thought by turning it into black and white and pushing the contrast and cutting people out of that conversation, it was more interesting, and it also gave me a place to put the type, and it's not that big red. So he loved this, and that's where we went.
This is some of that artist's work.
Steve Olson. Oh, it gets abstract.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
It gets very abstract. And then there are times when I worked at Rykodis, at first it was kind of a small company. I grew very quick and sold for $50 million or something. But you push yourself as an artist, music or graphics sometimes. And we did a reissue, or actually not a reissue, but it was does everybody know Devo? You guys remember them? Punk rock band, you do. We were doing a live album from their archives, and I really wanted to do something special and cool. And it's a really cool photograph, but what I wanted to do, I wanted to die cut it, right? So that the letters were cut out of the paper, and that's the image behind it. Basically, they told me, we can't afford to do that. So what I did was this, and then on the second page of the booklet, if you open it, the blue photo is there in its entirety. So if you're buying this and it's shrink wrapped like that, you think it's a die cut. That was the intention, and the Mongoloid years. So, sometimes that money still rocks. And here's another artist I worked for that she had a picture in mind, and I knew her manager well. She has a house out on Martha's Vineyard, and he said, she's got a picture. Her husband's a photographer, not James Taylor, the next husband. And he took a picture of her, and the record that he was putting out was the producers and the musicians might find this interesting piece, but the producer was also a musician, and he told her, why don't you cut all of your songs, You're So Vain and all these songs, and recut them in maybe a different format. That way you own the publishing. And if a movie wants to license your version of it, you get paid instead of the label who owns all the rights, because ultimately all the artists sell their publishing rights to the labels. So this is the album that her husband shot, and I was not crazy about it, but I get it. It's her re-examining her music, through a different lens kind of thing. And so I went down there and I looked at it, I showed her my ideas. She goes, no, I want to go with this one. It's like, okay. So we're sitting on her porch on the vineyard, in the middle of an apple orchard with horses running around, a lot like my place, And we're sitting there and she's just sketching the type out. And all I'm thinking is now we're deeply into the digital design world. And I'm just thinking, how am I going to get this? She's working on a pad, and this is what she did. She did all of these things, right? All I can think about is how am I going to isolate these without the white background and lay them over the photograph in a way that's you're not going to be able to tell, right? It took some work, and we did. There's one layer isolated, right? But it had white around it, so we had to recreate that. So basically, I think we got it. You know, it's not my favorite one, and it was certainly the process that was both interesting and frustrating at the same time. But you know, it was a once in a lifetime experience. You know, to go to an artist's house like that and sit there and do it with her on the porch, just the two of us. So it was pretty cool. And she also made, right before I left, she wanted to do a toast, and she made the strongest cocktail I've ever had in my life. And she says, yeah, I have a couple of these before bed. And I was like, dang. You know, one of the other things is you have to decide what you want to do and to what level you want to do it. At Rykodisc, we did the whole Elvis Costello catalog. We reissued all those records, and he wanted to put out a greatest hits album. All these artists, when they buy their catalogs, they work with their own label group in LA or New York or whatever. The president of Rykodisc came to see me around 11 o'clock in the morning. He said, it's not working with his team. Do you want to take a shot? And I said, yeah, sure. He goes, here's the thing. We need a finished cover by 5 o'clock this afternoon, and you're not going to get a credit. So I said, okay. And so I did it. He accepted it. This, again, he only wanted to use this photograph. I don't know if you all remember this, but this is a CD long box, because when they split the record album bins into CD bins, you could put two of these that were 12 by 12 next to each other and not redo the bins. This one's much better, in my opinion, because it shows the guitar. Here, he kind of looks like someone just turned on the lights and he's scared. I don't know. But it got approved. I didn't get a title. You know, it's funny, I looked up most of his other greatest hits titles, and for some reason, he doesn't do that. So I don't feel necessarily dissed on that one. And finally, when Rounder got sold, and I was the head of the art department there, I got a nice package to hang out for a while. Now, I've always been a music book reader. Anybody read music books, autobiographies, biographies? You do back there. And so, you know, I was just taking the time off, and I was reading so many books, and I couldn't really find anything relevant. And sometimes I'd read a review before I bought the book on Amazon or whatever, and it was a great review, and then the book sucked. So I was like, I don't know. So I started this All Music Books website. It's a free community site where you can go on. There's 10,000 books in the catalog. Anybody can write a review. Anybody can like a review, and you can buy the books through. Now it's Amazon, I know, but I can't redo the site. So you know, it's all these reviews. You can just click on anything, and then there's books that get constantly shifted into it. I put in a feature video to make it more interesting. And after all that, you know, I even made a bunch of postcards that said books are the new vinyl, right? They went over huge at the South by South Music Conference. So I started a podcast, and I'd interview the authors of the music books, and then we grew to 175 episodes and we'd interview the directors of music documentaries, which was fascinating. It was just so good. So that was my next step. One of the books, and I'll get you in just a sec, because I wanted to show this last one, and then I'll open it up. But this led me to a book that I'd never seen before by a photographer in LA whose parents split up when he was really young in the 60s. And he was like 14 years old, and he started walking around LA, taking all of these pictures, and he put them into a photography book. And they were just incredible. It was an incredible book. Okay. So this book of photography led me, you know, everybody says, what did you start doing when CDs disappeared and albums went away? Luckily, vinyl has come back. You know, I chose an interesting method because I found this book fascinating, but I took a step backwards in time, and also to make a documentary film about an art form for music that doesn't exist anymore. What you see in this preview of the movie is the only way you'll see these again, unless you look at the book. SOTT, that's the name of the movie, Sign of the Times. I personally named it after my Prince favorite song. And luckily, yeah, and then what's his name there? Who's the guy, the young guy who put out a record of that, which joins the so that's what I'm doing now. It's been 8 years in the making, but Eddie Buddy's last interview. And that dude did cut off his head. He crawled up there with a friend and cut Paul's head off. So that head he got it estimated for about $3 million, is what it's worth now. Those billboards were all hand painted, and we've interviewed the painters who would get up there with brushes and rollers and paint these things. And after their time was up, they'd be taken down and whitewashed over. So they were gone completely forever. That's why these photographs, and hopefully this movie is so important, is because now, as we saw, with some of those in the later parts, they're all digital, which is great, but it's not the same, and that's a huge part of LA's history and culture and their gift to the music industry, in my opinion. So that's all I got. You guys got questions? I'm happy to answer anything, or if you want to stick around and talk, I'm happy to do that too.